Okay. All right, I'm gonna start letting some folks in. Welcome, welcome. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. We're gonna let a few more folks trickle into the call. If you're feeling inclined, we encourage you to turn your camera on. It's always nicer to talk to faces, if you can. And please also put your names in the chat and where you are joining the call from. That would be super helpful because we'll be doing a little raffle at the end of the call as well. So that will be helpful information to have.
Where's the chat? I don't see it down there.
There should be a little chat button. Maybe there's 3 dots at the bottom of your toolbar.
It says more. Okay, thank you.
No problem. And again, we'll just get started in about a minute. Okay, I think for the sake of time, we'll just jump in and get started. We'll let folks come into the call. Amit, are you still good to let people in as they come in? Awesome. No? Okay, I can let people in, no worries. So welcome everyone. My name is Carly Silverman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Education and Program Manager for Hazon Detroit. Tonight, before we get started, it's important that you put your name and location in the chat because tonight we will be raffling off 3 months of free composting services and 2 bags of compost from Midtown Composting. Unfortunately, it's only available to folks that live in the Metro Detroit area. So while we have those that live elsewhere that are joining us this evening, we're all going to leave excited and educated. So really, we're all winners tonight. So Hazon Detroit is a nonprofit organization, and we are leading a transformative movement weaving sustainability into the fabric of Jewish life in order to create a healthier and more sustainable and more equitable world for all. And we do this through partnering with existing congregations, organizations, and individuals through education, earth-based ritual, greening for sustainability, programming, retreats, events, and so on. We recognize that we are in a global environmental crisis, and Jewish tradition compels us to respond. Brit means covenant, and Hazon means vision. And the purpose of the Brit Hazon is to empower individuals to make specific commitments to change through the Brit Hazon, thereby contributing to a more environmentally sustainable world for all. So while this encourages small actions on an individual level, if we all commit to these small actions, it has a greater impact on a larger scale. And we know that taking action can be hard, but by taking the Brit Hazon pledge, we'll make it a little bit easier. So there are 6 categories of the Brit Hazon: experimenting with a plant-rich diet, reducing food waste, reducing household waste, reducing energy use, buying less stuff, and growing your own food or buying local. So the idea is you choose one at a time. Within each category, there are suggested action items. Choose one, try it on for 6 weeks. And tonight's focus is get growing or buying local. Global shipping, especially of refrigerated goods, is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. By choosing to grow your own produce and or buy from local vendors, you support your local economy and lower your carbon footprint. To get us started on our get growing or buying local journey, we have Ian Sawyer and Marissa Weitzman on the call, joining us to teach us and guide us through the magnificent world of mushrooms. They will introduce themselves and share a bit about their background and education when they are presenting. And we hope by the end of this call that you feel empowered and excited to start exploring your own relationship with fungi and just maybe start growing your own mushrooms at home. I am not the expert on this subject, so I am going to pass this off to Ian, who's going to get us started on this presentation. So Ian, take it away.
Hi everyone. Good to be here with you all. I'm here to talk about mushrooms. But a little bit more. So my name's Ian. He, him. I live in Detroit right now. Me and my wife, we co-founded this intentional community organization, just kind of like a little focal point for how we live, called Taproot Sanctuary. We're located on the east side of Detroit, and the idea with Taproot Sanctuary is how do we live in right relationship with ourselves, with the earth, and our neighbors. And I think, I think that's kind of like the way we're, I think many of us recognize the various crises that we're experiencing, and I think right now, there's a breakdown of relationships, but also we see building up those relationships, building up right relationships as being a key for transformation. And I think fungi are in fact great mentors in how to be a network, how to be a part of an ecosystem and improving it dramatically without, and it's not neutral. Like there are parasitic fungi, it's not, I think right now there's a lot of focus on fungi being like this magical organism that's like symbiotic and mutualistic and really supporting and tying the forest floor and equitably distributing resources, but it's not like that. It's not totally black and white like that. I think there are parasitic fungi. There are fungi that work in more of a capitalistic manner. So it runs a whole spectrum, but I think within that there's still a lot of really interesting things that can help us expand our view of what it means to be human. And I think ultimately that's kind of, I want to share about the cultivation part, but I also want to share about fungal biology and how that might inform a different way, give us a different vision of how to be on this earth. So I will, if everyone is okay, I'm going to share this little slide I made. And then feel free to, is the slide up? Can people see it? Cool. Feel free to jump in if you have any questions. It would be great to have it be conversational if possible. You can also raise your hand, and if I see it. But yeah, let's keep a conversation. It's a small group too. So hashtag Fungal New Deal. This is a project that I started late last year, and it's going on right now. So the Fungal New Deal, like the name might imply, the hope is to fundamentally, that's right, fundamentally transform mushroom cultivation in Detroit, Metro Detroit, and beyond. There's a lot of really interesting fungi fanatics, mycophiles, and I'm on the shallower end of that, I would say, but they're really amazing organisms, and I'm hoping everyone here will renew their interests and become more eager to interact with them. So decomposition to recomposition. That's kind of like what they do. They decompose and then they recompose. Next slide. Okay, so seeing like fungi. So this is the mushroom life cycle. So there's going to be different terms thrown around. So mushrooms are basically the fruit body, but that in some cases we consume, but it's a small part of the actual organism. And so spores are kind of like seeds. They're microscopic, and that's their seed. And so the seeds are released from the fruit body. So what we often, encounter in the supermarket or the farmer's market or whatever is in fact kind of like the end stage of the actual fungi's life. It's when the mushroom's fruit, when the fungi is running out of space, and they're like, because fungi they don't have legs, they cannot walk. They spread spores to other food sources, and that's how they spread. So this is kind of like their life cycle. And so this is, let's see, what is this? Let's get some participation. What are we looking at? Really? All right, Marissa.
It's the mycelium. It's like the root structure.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah,
the
so this
mushroom.
is very good. You are one step closer to that raffle, although I guess you're not eligible because you're far away. But you're a winner in my mind. Yeah, so this is the mycelium. So mycelium is super cool. So this is like the bulk of the fungal organism. So can I go back? On the previous slide, you saw the spores germinate and then little roots coming out of it. So initially it's called hyphae or hyphae, and that's just like a single strand of this white stuff. And then as it keeps growing and branching off, it's like more and more hyphae start growing, and it becomes so dense, and that's when it becomes mycelium. And so these mycelium, they're both sensing what's around them and then also analyzing the chemical structure, releasing enzymes to break it down. So that's kind of, mycelium grows over the food and then breaks down the food and eats it. But this is kind of like, this is the bulk of what the fungus is. So Paul Stamets, I don't know if folks know Paul Stamets. He's one of the more well-known mycologists. He wrote this book, Mycelium Running, and also has a TED Talk called 6 Ways Fungi Can Save the World. But he's just deep in the mycological world, and so he says fungi are the interface species between life and death. And so this is like, to me, this is really what makes fungi so special. They dissolve boundaries. They dissolve the boundaries between life and death, but they also, like lichen is this symbiotic organism between algae and a mushroom. And so they really dissolve the boundary of what is an individual. Like people who study lichen are called lichenologists, but they talk about how they're one of the few fields where they don't even know what they're studying, because lichens is this one organism, but in fact it's multiple organisms choosing to be in relationship with each other, and becoming, it's kind of like the mitochondria in our cells or chlorophyll in plant cells. It's like there's multiple organisms that join together and they're like this super organism. And so I think, to me, fungi are a key species because they teach us about different ways of being together and dissolving this sense of I as separate. So here is the Brit Hazon 6, is it principles? Six principles. And so I wanted to look at this from a fungal lens, and kind of, because I think, because that's what, so again, like there's the food growing component of fungi, growing mushrooms, eating mushrooms, and that's kind of like the more superficial level, I think, of becoming, interacting with mushrooms. But there's also this distinct way of looking at how to be on this earth, and so I think they kind of have, to me, it seems like when you know more about fungi, they kind of share this wisdom. So I guess so I just wanted to share some things about how mushrooms are relevant to these 6 principles. So experimenting with a plant-rich diet. So mushrooms are a great source of protein. So that's something pretty rare to be able to grow in the city, especially. So that's kind of like a special thing about growing mushrooms in the city. They have a lot of protein. They have just a lot of medicinal properties. Reduce energy use. So this is, mushrooms break down. Primarily, the mushrooms we eat are called saprobic, which means they break down wood. And so this is cool because I think part of it is reducing energy use, but also we have to, I think, reconsider what is energy, right? Like, so energy isn't the only, like, the things that come out of a two-pronged socket isn't just energy. Like, the sun is constantly beaming down energy on us, and trees are some of the most efficient organisms at converting that sunlight into into a storable form. In the tree's case, it's carbon, and so mushrooms actually break down that carbon that's stored up in the tree. So in fact, it's like reducing energy use, but I think from a fungal perspective, it's also, well, I guess it's like from a fungal allyship, it's like how do we use these biological energies, these things that are storing energy, and how do we tap into that? So trees, not, and you don't even, like, there's trees cut down every day by arborists. So it's like, if we can convert that tree that's cut by arborists into food and grow that in the city, that's like, in fact, it's reducing energy use in some ways, but it's also like producing energies that's not being tapped into. Reducing food waste, it's kind of like the same thing. Fungi are the primary decomposers of things on this earth. So they're able to, again, convert this idea of waste into decomposition into recomposition. Get growing, buy local. Mushrooms don't store that well, so you really want to, there's just so much acid to growing it local. Reduce household waste. There's an experiment in Mexico where diapers were actually decomposed by fungus, and it reduced the diaper mass by like 80%, and the mushrooms were actually edible. Like, it breaks it down to the core components and recomposes it as an edible thing. And then buy less stuff. So again, it's like, there on a human level, it's like buying less things, but on this fungi level, it's like, how do we tap into the things that are growing around us? So anyways, that, I just think it's like there's a lot to learn beyond just like buying and eating mushrooms, but it's also like how to think like mushrooms. So let's see. So I wanted to share about 3 pretty easy ways of cultivating mushrooms. And actually, if you're in this area, if you look up, either if you're on Instagram, Taproot Sanctuary, or if you look up hashtag Fungal New Deal, where we have a partnership with the arborist who's always cutting down trees. And so once a month, we get together and he collects these trees and we inoculate it with mushrooms. And so people take home these mushroom logs that will produce for like 6 years. So I wanted to go through some common ways of cultivating mushrooms. Unfortunately, like, it's on screen, and we can't do hands-on here. But if you're in the area, definitely be on the lookout for Fungal New Deal. Everything's free, and we would love to see you there. So this is this is the most easy to cultivate at home mushroom, I think. It's called the wine cap mushroom. You can grow it outside. So all you need is cardboard, spawn, and wood chips, or straw. So in this case, you're laying down cardboard. They're poking holes in it. And then, so if you're gonna do straw, so you can just buy a bale of straw at some farm supply store. You cover that cardboard with the straw, and then you mix the spawn in. Oops. There we go. Yeah, so that's called spawn. And so you can buy that. So these videos are from Field and Forest. They're a spawn supplier in Wisconsin. And so you can get that bag of spawn for them. That's kind of the easiest way to start. There's different ways of getting this kind of source material. But I would say that's the easiest. Okay, so before I go any further, are there any questions or any comments?
I just, sorry for the echo. But I just wanted to say that this is a really cool topic, and I feel like I'm just learning so much. Like, I like how you're incorporating the think like a mushroom into the whole mindset. So yeah, I'm just really enjoying it.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, and I'm better in person, so this I'm trying to make make it interesting. But yeah, there's a scholar that I really like, Bayo Akomolafe, and he talks a lot about how we need to really decompose the image of human that we created, right? Like, so much of the way we are in this world has been really programmed in an industrial model. Our education is based on an industrial model. I think Gandhi talks about, the more you work with machines, the more machine-like you become. And I think there's, like, obviously we are all very liberated human beings who are seeking a just, equitable, beautiful world. But even within that, like, our conditioning is so strong that sometimes these biological organisms can, like, give us great revelations, I think, on multiple levels. And so, yeah, to me, it's like the more it's kind of like growing is just this, it's an invitation to start learning a little bit more about how they are in this world. So yeah, my biggest hope is, like, that either you come out to a Fungal New Deal thing and get your hands in the actual mycelium, smell it, touch it, or if you're not able to come, like, this can kind of give you a springboard to dive deeper into that world. Thank you.
Did they soak the straw in something specific or like just water?
Yeah, you just soak it in water.
Okay.
You can also, in this case, you can just soak it in water. This is something you'll have to look up. I'm not going to cover it fully, but you can also ferment the straw by putting it in water for a week, and then putting it in water for a week, and then and so when you put the straw, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop sharing just so it's like, how do I stop sharing? Desktop. Here we go. Oops. Sorry. I don't know what I'm doing. Wait, can people still hear me? Yeah. Okay, sorry. I can't get my face on. But yeah, so you can also ferment the straw. And so what fermenting the straw does is it kills off competitive organisms. So you just put the straw in water for a week, and all the anaerobic bacteria that's on the straw dies off. And then you pull it out of the water, and all the anaerobic bacteria that proliferated in that stagnant water now dies off. And you have, for quote unquote pasteurized, you have a pasteurized substrate. So substrate is anything you grow the mushroom, the fungus on. And so oftentimes cultivation, I feel like Marissa might talk about this, but oftentimes when you're cultivating on a substrate, you want to pasteurize it. And so you can do that through fermentation by soaking it for a week in water. But in this case, wine caps, it's the easiest mushroom to grow, partly because it doesn't compete as much. Other mushrooms are really, like, they want to be dominant, so they're going to compete with other organisms, whereas wine cap kind of like coexists. So that's why growing wine caps is cool. Next one, this is log inoculation. So this is what Fungal New Deal is doing a lot of. And the cool thing with growing out of logs is there's just so much. So straw, you can kind of, you can kind of get an image of, like, it's probably going to be easier for you to digest straw than wood, even though you wouldn't want to do that. But, so fungi can break down the straw a lot easier than they can break down wood. So that means you get mushrooms to grow faster, but at the same time, you also don't get as much longevity. Like, you won't get, like, out of whatever, 10 pounds of straw, you're not going to get 20 pounds of mushrooms. Like you're only going to get less than 10. And so with wood, you just have so much mass that you're likely to get more mushrooms. And then the other cool thing I just talked about pasteurizing is when wood naturally has antifungal and antibacterial properties when it's alive, because we're just talking about, trees are some of the most effective organisms at harvesting sunlight. They're this really rich nutrient source that all kinds of organisms are trying to tap into. But when they're alive, they stay alive because they're able to fend that off. But once you cut them down, they start losing that property. So they're, for all practical purposes, they're semi-pasteurized when you first cut them when they're fresh. And so that's what's exciting about the Fungal New Deal is arborists are cutting these trees all the time. And so there's like this, for practically unlimited amount of trees that can be converted into food. And the process is quite simple. So here they're drilling holes into the log. There's a specific pattern. You want to do it in a diamond pattern like that. And then there's two different ways of introducing the fungi into the wood. So you can either pound it in like that with these little, they're called plugs, or you can also put in spawn with a specialized tool. And so that's how the Fungal New Deal does it. And then after that is, so you drill all these holes and then you introduce the mycelium, the spawn into it, and then you wax the holes to make sure the mycelium doesn't dry out. And then you store the log for half a year or so, and then eventually you get mushrooms. And so you can grow oyster mushrooms, shiitake mushrooms, lion's mane, reishi, chestnut, nameko, all kinds of mushrooms on wood. And that's very it just makes a lot of sense. And that's how a lot of mushrooms have historically been cultivated. And then lastly, this is called the Totem Technique. So there's so many ways of growing mushrooms, and these are just some of the ways that are commonly done, but there's so much room for experimentation. Like that fermenting straw is a relatively newer thing that people have started doing because people just, someone thought of it. So Totem Technique is, so this is the spawn bag again. So you're breaking up the spawn, and then you can do it in a plastic bag or a paper bag. And then so you put the spawn in the bottom, and then so that's a log that's been cut. It's about like 8-inch diameter, and then you put that, and then so you're kind of creating a spawn sandwich. So the spawn and then the log, and then you put some more spawn on it, and then you put another log. Oh, and then you close off the top, and that's basically it. So it's and all of these things, this is, again, it's just a springboard. So if you look it up, you'll find it. You can reach out to me. But I guess the main thing is, like, once you have the log and the spawn, like, growing mushrooms is really easy. And so this is a chart of all the different kinds of woods that are found commonly in the city, or in the woods. It's just like it's in the US you'll find a lot of these. And then down on the left side is mushroom varieties. And so this is just like one small section of what's possible. There's so much more, but this is kind of like a chart that tells you. So oysters are really carnivorous. They can grow on all kinds of woods. Shiitake is the same way, but lion's mane, nameko, reishi, which is intensely medicinal plant. Medicinal fungi, grows on like oaks, sweet gum. It actually grows on elm too. They haven't updated this, but so, and then here's just kind of like a little picture of when's the best time to harvest. So you can, so this is something I do a lot, is like on the side of the road, sometimes you see trees that are thrown away, and I collect those trees. And then especially in the fall, winter, which is the best time to harvest them. But we're just coming out of the worst time, so if you're wanting to experiment, now it's starting to become a good time to find logs and inoculate them. Let's see.
Why is it the first time?
Uh-huh.
in the spring, in early
Yeah.
summer.
Yeah, partly it's because you want to maintain the bark. Let me try to turn off this screen real quick. How do I turn off the screen? Do I just go back to
There might be a button up top.
stop share? Ah, we're back. All right. Yeah, so it's kind of, it has to do with the bark. So the during the spring, sap is flowing through the bark, and so the bark is a little bit loose. So I don't know if anyone's ever done it, but you can strip bark really easily off of trees, especially when the leaves are just forming. It's so satisfying. Like the whole bark will just strip. But that's bad for fungi because fungi need moisture. So fungi need water, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen, which is like the basic building blocks for many organisms. So water, so wood, logs, and so that's why you're soaking the straw, because they need that water. And straw is a really good substrate because it also has these little nodules in it, so there's all these oxygen packets within it. So you can pack down the straw, but there'll still be a lot of oxygen left in it, and you soak it in the water, and then it's full of water. But logs also are full of water, as are trees. Because of trees are full of water, logs are too. And so the bark helps maintain that moisture. So if you inoculate in the spring, you probably will get mushrooms, but they say the logs last about an inch. Inch diameter is a year of production. So if you have like a 6-inch logs, it'll produce mushrooms for like 6 years, maybe 2 to 3 times a year. If you have like an 8-inch logs, 8 years. But if the bark peels off, it probably won't last as long. So it's like you're putting in this energy, you're putting in this time to maximize that effort. Fall and winter kind of has the most robust bark. Summer, not bad. Spring is not the best. Any comments? Any questions? I know that we're just like we're just zooming through this.
We can also save questions for the end. We can let Marissa present so you can hold on to your questions in your head, and then we can do some questions at the end with you.
Do you prefer that?
Yeah, I think for the sake of flow and time, we'll let Marissa jump in and do her thing. Cool. And Marissa, I will share my screen.
Great.
Can we see it okay?
Yeah. So I mean, I can see it. Can everyone else see it?
Great.
Yeah, and Ian, that was great. Yeah, I like the way you're thinking in terms of mushrooms as a metaphor for life and the vision. Yeah, and so hi everyone. My name is Marissa Shear, and I am excited to share with you how to grow oyster mushrooms at home. A little bit about me. I started growing mushrooms. You can switch to the next slide. I started growing mushrooms because of these guys. I have worked as a garden educator in San Francisco for 5 years at a school called Alta Vista School, and I developed a program. And during that program that I was developing, I learned how to grow oyster mushrooms. And actually I learned how to grow a lot more than just oyster mushrooms, a variety of different kinds. But with the kids, I decided to create a little mushroom garden with them. And they had so much fun doing the whole process. And so I just wanted to start here because anyone, any age can grow mushrooms. And yeah, this is like kindergarten class here. And this is one harvest we harvested a lot more than this, and we grew these oyster mushrooms on straw. Next slide. And over the years, I learned a lot about growing mushrooms. I would still say I'm a novice, and I'm still a beginner in many ways. There's a lot to experiment and to learn, as Ian has been saying. But come the pandemic, in the very beginning, I was growing some mushrooms at home, and I was starting the mushroom growing unit at the school, and I had some extra materials, and I just posted on Facebook. Does anyone want a mushroom growing bucket kit? And I have some extra materials, and I got like 100+ responses to that comment. And so from there, I thought, okay, maybe I'll start a little, try to start a little business in this, like a little side hustle. So I developed a little business called Mushrooms from Mars. A lot of people call me Mars. It's a nickname of mine. We made a really fun sticker that was on the buckets. Fun little fact, Carly and I were living in the same unit, so she saw all of this going on from the window. And the business, I learned a lot from it, but I wouldn't say it was successful in this type of scale for growing mushrooms in this way. And so here in this slide, I linked a couple of articles, and you're welcome to share this slide with participants here. The Mushrooms from Mars journey explains my learnings from growing at this scale and why I think it was not successful, and ways that I propose to do it in the future if anyone's interested. And then the How to Grow Mushrooms article outlines a lot of the things that are in this presentation. Next slide. So these are oyster mushrooms. There's lots of different varieties of them. This is the Latin name, Pleurotus striatus. Probably I'm saying it wrong, but I always give the Latin names a try. And yeah, there's like, I think hundreds of varieties. They grow all over the world. They're so beautiful. The one on the left is pink oysters, and the one on the right are just a white variety. And they also come in blue and gray and brown. And yeah, they're one of my favorite types of mushrooms because I think they're really delicious. Next slide. And they're a really great mushroom to start out and grow. I think that they're one of the easiest mushrooms to grow. And I took a course through Radical Mycology with Peter McCoy, and that's how I learned how to grow them in this style. In this book is amazing. It is like the guide for growing with all sorts of techniques and all sorts of ways. And yeah, he's a great thinker. And yeah, we're going to go through the bucket method, which you can learn about more in this book too. So next slide. So this is the bucket method. And yeah, we're going to go step by step and learn how to build one of these at home. So next slide. So the first step is to get a bucket. You can get a 5-gallon bucket. Make sure to get a lid. You can actually grow these mushrooms in any almost any container. Where you see me drilling to the left of that, I actually found that container on the street, just in Oakland, like in a free pile, and washed it out and grew mushrooms in it with a little tray on top. So if you don't have a bucket, you can also grow in another container too. So you want to drill holes around the bucket. The holes, you want them to be either 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch, spaced about 5 inches apart. I do it in like a zigzag pattern. And then you want to drill 2 smaller holes at the bottom, just to drain out all the water. Make sure that it's not soggy in there. Next slide. Then step 2 is preparing the substrate. And as Ian was saying, the substrate is what the mushrooms are eating. The substrate is what the mushrooms grow on, and mushrooms are decomposers, so they are going to be decomposing, in this case, straw. So in the way that I was growing mushrooms is I would submerge them. I got a trash can. You can also, if you're doing it on, if you could do it in a trash can, then you can build like 5 or 6 different buckets or more. You can also submerge it just in a bucket as well, or a couple buckets in water. But you're essentially cold pasteurizing the straw, and it's like a fermentation method where you are killing the aerobic bacteria on the straw and creating an environment for the mycelium colony to grow and expand and colonize the substrate and be the dominant living thing in that. So yeah, what you do is you just put the straw underwater, you weight it down, and you can do it for 4 to 6 days. And then after 4 to 6 days, it will smell a little different. I don't think it smells bad, but it just definitely smells a little different. And then you always want to have a relatively clean environment that you're working in when you're doing the inoculation part. So I placed a clean tarp on the ground or on a table, and then I took the straw out, as you can see on that bottom picture. I also put in the far right in that picture, you see some dark stuff, that's day-old coffee grounds, and then also the mushroom spawn, which came in these blocks, but then I broke them up into the bucket. Okay, next slide. So what is mushroom spawn? Ian went over this already, but essentially it is the mycelium growing on a substrate, and it's like young mycelium that's very vigorous and strong. And you can buy this at a lot of different places. If you just Google search like where to buy mushroom spawn, lots of places will come up. I'm sure there's local places too. And this is you can also look into your waste streams and potentially contact a mushroom company and see if they have older ones. And that's originally how I started, is I would just take the older mushroom spawn blocks that were already spent and reuse them, and then they would grow on the straw. But if you want to make sure that your mushroom spawn is clean and vigorous and strong, then just buy a new package. And this package could grow many, many buckets. Okay, next slide. So stuffing the buckets. Again, you want to have a clean environment. What I do is I put a little bit of alcohol into a spray bottle and just spray down the surface just to make sure that it's clean. And then, yeah, put a tarp down, put all of your materials in place, and you want to stuff your bucket kind of like you're making lasagna. So stuff the straw in first, and then sprinkle a little bit of this spawn on top of that with a little bit of coffee grounds. And you just keep on doing that until your bucket is really stuffed. So stuffed that it's actually kind of hard to put the lid on. The reason why you want it to be really stuffed is because you want it to be very easy for the mycelium to spread. And you don't really want a bunch of air gaps that the mycelium would have to jump really far to get to a piece of straw. So, yep, that's how I did it. And next slide. And then the next step is just wait and observe. You want to put your bucket in a shady place, sheltered from wind. I like to put my bucket under a tarp. So the point of the coffee, I just saw that question, is it's an extra nutrient that the mycelium will eat. Mushrooms like to eat specific substrates, and coffee is just another one of those substrates that oyster mushrooms also like to consume. And it just makes your colony extra strong. There's a lot of other supplements that you could add to this method if you wanted to, and you can look that up in like the radical mycology book. Okay, so step 4, wait and observe. You don't necessarily want to open up your bucket a lot because you don't want to expose your mycelium to all of the different bacteria and spores and things in the air. But I highly recommend to open up your bucket at least once, in the next week or so after you do this, because it's so interesting to see the mycelium growing and taking over the straw. This is a close-up picture of what it looks like. Okay, next. And then after a few weeks, all of a sudden you'll start seeing the primordial stage. And so this is like the tiny little mushroom heads beginning to pop out of the holes. And it's incredible how fast the fruiting body takes until it's like mature. It only needs a few days. And so from this tiny little bunch of mushrooms till the mature size, you can harvest it in like maybe 3-4 days. It's incredible. During this time, though, it's really important to make sure that your environment around the mushrooms is humid and that it's shaded. So what I do is I just tarp it, and I spray with a hose, maybe on the ground, or a misting bottle, like just spray around and make sure that that environment stays humid. In Oakland, I only watered like once a day in the mornings, and then I tarped it, and that was enough humidity to for a healthy environment to keep these mushrooms growing. Next slide. And then this was like the final product before harvest. Right when the first mushroom in this clump begins to, I think it's concave, is that the right word? The mushroom cap begins to flip up. That's when you harvest. You don't want all of them to flip up because then they're going to release their spores. So, yeah, so you just end up breaking off the whole clump. You can do that either with your hands or just slice it with a knife. Next slide. And generally you have a really great harvest, and these buckets can produce a couple times in a season, and then sometimes you can even let them sit for a whole year and then they'll actually produce again. So this was just one mushroom. It was like as big as the palm of my hand. I thought it was amazing. But yeah, I just wanted to share a couple ways that I like to enjoy my mushroom harvests, which are just frying them up in a pan with a little bit of garlic and butter and salt. Next slide. You can also, if you have a really big harvest, you can dry them in the sun on a baking sheet, or you can ferment them. And this book right here, it's called Wildcrafted Fermentation by Pascal Baudor, has a really great recipe. Also his Instagram has really great recipes on how to ferment mushrooms, and they're just super delicious in like any dish. One thing I just wanted to point out too with this method is you probably don't want to have more than like 6 buckets in one area. The reason why the mushrooms from Mars business, in my opinion, didn't work out is because there was too many buckets that I was trying to store in one area, and that attracts flies and different things that can potentially contaminate the colonies. But this method is really successful with, like, if you wanted to do like 6 buckets in your backyard, I've always had success with smaller numbers of buckets. Yep. And next slide. I think I have one more. Yep. If you have any questions, I'm here for you as a resource. Any questions along the way, I'd be happy to answer them. Yeah. And really, like with growing anything, I find it really joyful to just be, learning and observing along the way. And yeah, every time I grow anything, I end up learning so much and have a lot of fun. So I hope that this method works for you. Yeah. I think there was one other question that was in the chat about let's see, watering. Okay. So because the straw is inside the bucket, and it's already really moist, you do not need to water your bucket. It's actually not good to open up the lid of your bucket at you only want to open it up maybe once, maybe twice to see what's going on, because it's interesting and you just want to make sure that the colony looks healthy. But otherwise, there's enough water in the straw to keep it going. You just need to keep it in a shady and humid environment. And thank
But-
you. Yeah, let's
yeah.
see.
It looks like maybe there was an earlier question for, I think, Ian. What do you need to do to care for the log while you wait?
So similar. So again, it's like fungi, it's kind of like we're just trying to cultivate the ideal habitat for fungi to grow. So similar like the buckets, you want the logs to be stored in a damp, shady place. Tarp's a great idea. Yeah, it's kind of like thinking about in the forest, when you walk in the forest, where you see mushrooms, and then like what is that place in where you live that has that environment. So with logs, you just want to store it off the ground, because in the ground, if it's touching the soil, there's a lot of fungi that are also there, so then it becomes a competitive arena if it's touching the ground. So it can just be on a brick or something. You can have it upright, or you can lay it sideways off the ground. Just make sure that it gets, if it's raining if it rains once a week or every other week, that should be enough for the log to get, to not dry out, because that's what you want to prevent. But basically that's it. Amit's husband actually came and did a log. Did it fruit? Did it not fruit?
It was an unsuccessful log, which is why I'm
Yeah.
to problem
That's,
solve.
that's what
But
I thought.
I think we're talking about your log. You can come and ask about it. I think it didn't have a tarp. I think
Well,
that might be key.
But also, you're eligible for any amount of replacements. Or recall. Yeah, there's a little. Last year, I did more one-on-one. So this year I'm doing bigger workshops. Last year I did more one-on-one. The problem was I was avoiding using paraffin wax, because paraffin wax is a petroleum byproduct. So I was trying to do the environmental, let's do local beeswax. But then there's some animal that loves the bees. So you remember, like, we drill the holes, put the spawn in, and then we were covering it with beeswax. But most of those, there has been some successful ones, but a lot of them, some animal just took off the plugs, or took off the wax, and that basically dried the fungi out before the mycelium could really get established in the log. So that was that was my error. So paraffin wax when you're doing this.
Okay, great. That's great to have that additional context.
Yeah.
I was happy to take on the failure though.
Well, it's not a failure yet. And the other thing with logs, so the straws, it's a pretty fast turnaround, but with the logs, it's longer. It's like 6 to 9 months. Sometimes like it takes a year. It takes longer. So it's interesting, yeah. And one thing, I don't know, Marissa probably might have had this experience too, but it can be really joyful and really frustrating. Like, it's so vigorous, but also really delicate. And so, like, a lot of times it's like there's moments where you're just wowed. It's like, wow, like, I can't believe this thing is doing this. And then other times it's like, really? Like, so.
Yeah, it makes you really appreciate when you see mushrooms growing in the wild and you're like, wow, that colonized that whole area and that's fruiting successfully. Because, when I was growing them in the buckets in a larger amount, there was a lot of unsuccessful cases and a lot of issues with other parasitic funguses coming into the buckets. So that's why if you're doing this method, it's really good to do it on a smaller scale.
Awesome, thank you. Francie, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, I do. I have a question about mushroom log. I had purchased one as a gift for my husband probably 3 decades ago when you guys weren't born yet. And it was already, prepped or whatever. I followed the directions exactly. Got 3 mushrooms, was really excited. That's all, 3 mushrooms. It was a shiitake mushroom log. So I don't remember any of the details. Like I said, it was a long time ago. So what's your theory on why it didn't work? Like, maybe the directions were not specific. They didn't have enough detail, or the company was crap, or what do you think?
Yeah. I think that maybe some possibilities is that a competitor species took hold of that log, or it could be also that it dried out, that the log was, because when the mushrooms fruit, mushrooms will not fruit in a log unless it gets some level of establishment. So the fact that it fruited signifies that they did get established in that log. um but the fact that it didn't continue to produce probably means like maybe it wasn't a health, yeah, so it was like maybe it only got established in a small area and competitor species were in there, or I don't know if you're watering it, but maybe the bark started slipping off. That would be my thought.
Okay, and if I wanted to try again, but I don't want to, like, does the person themselves have to drill the holes, or you can buy it and that's already done for you?
I think there's different ways of doing it. With specifically the Fungal New Deal, it's kind of like, we have the spawn, we have the logs, but what we're missing is people to put the spawn into the logs. So usually we have 10 to 20 people that come out, and people do their own, or people kind of collaborate together and do it together. So, in our case, it's just kind of like we're providing the environment for people to grow mushrooms. So, I mean, I'm sure you could come and just pick up a log too. Like, people are doing a bunch extra. But I think part of the joy is like, kind of doing the process. Like, if you don't want to do the drilling part, I think people will be happy to drill. And then we use this tool. You like, here's some spawn. You like put it in there, and then put this on the hole, and then it goes, and it's a really satisfying process.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions before we wrap up the call this evening?
I just wanted to share one more thing. So Marissa, I also went to the Radical Mycology fruit cultivation course, and so this is kind of cool. This is something that we learned. You did liquid cultures. So this is it's kind of hard to see. There's a blob floating in there. Let's see. Yeah, so that is pure mycelium. This is lion's mane. So this is kind of like a mother culture. So if you give the right environment, this lion's mane culture, all you need is like 2 milliliters, and you can expand that exponentially. As long as the environment is right, like, it will keep growing. So that's kind of like the cool thing about, the scalability, the possibility, just the fact that like just this tiny bit of mushroom, so out of this, if all of the conditions were right, I could grow, thousands of pounds of mushrooms just from this little jar. So that's kind of, that's just kind of mind-boggling to think about how they're able to just keep expanding the network, decomposing, recomposing. In this case, lion's mane, it actually helps. It helps like the synaptic connectors. I think it helps produce myelin, which is like the synaptic connectors in your brain. So it helps your brain like get more connected. So, like the multiple levels of connectivity that mycelium can create is something that's really exciting for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian. Well, thank you to our presenters, Marissa and Ian. That was awesome. I think we're all very much more prepared to start growing mushrooms than we did before we started this call. I'll also share, Francie, you're our compost winner of the evening. So I will send you instructions to your email on how you can access that 3 months of free composting and 2 bags of compost.
So, all right. I actually already have a relationship with Midtown Composting.
Okay. Well,
they're awesome.
Great.
They're wonderful.
Fantastic. Well, you're the winner this evening, so congratulations.
So then what are you're going to send me whatever I need to know, or what?
Yes, I will send you instructions on how to access your free composting services and 2 bags of compost. I have your email address. If you're feeling inspired, I just put the Brit Hazon link in the chat. So if you'd like to take the pledge or just want more information, it's there as well. We'll have our next call, Brit Hazon call, on July 26th. So look out for more information about that. But everyone have a beautiful evening. Thank you for joining, and we hope we'll see you again soon.